As far as the investigation itself, it did present challenges that are not ordinary. I think most people realize that a random act, that there's no personal connection between a suspect and a victim, is actually extremely rare. Honestly, most homicide investigations are not necessarily whodunits. It's more of collecting evidence, making the arrest, and then preparing that case for trial and just making sure that all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed. It's not extremely common that you work a case that you can't develop a lead in a suspect within a fairly short amount of time. In this one, we, in addition to the terrain where the crime occurred, that automatically caused a lapse of the time that it took for those little girls to get to someone to make them aware that this had happened, and then the time it took them to get out to the ranger station to make those notifications, and then, of course, the time that it took to get to the crime scene. So,
how far was that approximately?
Is from the trailhead, it was about a half a mile into the woods.
Was a trail clearly marked or easy to navigate?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
From my understanding, it's very similar. I've not been in that park specifically, but it's very similar from my understanding of Pinnacle Mountain, Petty Jean, things like that, where they're clearly marked hiking trails.
Okay.
So, one of the things that it wasn't an impediment necessarily, but you had to pause on some of the information that was put out because, again, everything started with those two little girls that had just witnessed something that it's hard to even, process what those girls had witnessed. So when you are working off a description of a suspect, knowing that person has been, those, juveniles have been traumatized so much, there's a lot of collaboration that has to go into that. Not that you don't trust them, but we know from law enforcement from years of doing this job that eyewitness accounts are sometimes flawed. Mm-hmm. So especially when somebody witnesses a traumatic event, that it skews their memory. And so when the information on the suspect was developed from these girls, there was quite a time lapse to be able to corroborate that with other witnesses that saw people or saw the person that matched the description that these girls gave us. And then by the time that you take that and you start to corroborate that information, and then that leads to the car being identified from a person that saw the suspect that was identified by that was described by the little girls. And then that information, you start working off that, and to the technology that was used. We live in a day of Ring cameras and surveillance cameras and security cameras that are stationed throughout, and they were able to go back and look at every possible route in and out of that park and capture data that was that captured that potential suspect vehicle. And then we were able to narrow that down to the one particular car that we felt like was our car of interest. There are some technology things that I probably won't get into today that are available that helped us identify that car, isolate that specific car once it was identified. And that led, of course, to the arrest itself. One thing that I, would like to touch on, we met every day. At the end of the day, we would have a conference call with the investigators, and we talked about the need for the public, and I believe in that, and I believe that we owe it to the public to try to put as much information out as possible. But you're always hesitant in a situation like this, because if we put out what we think and what we suspect, but it's not actually the case, and I'll give you an example. We knew that this suspect was injured. We knew that there was blood loss on scene. We suspected that we knew if it was consistent with attacks like that and other crime scenes and other crimes that had been investigated, we suspected we knew the types of injuries. Our concern about that was, number one, we didn't put that out to the public immediately, because the first thing that those investigators did was went to every emergency room and urgent health care center in a tri-state area, just anywhere that was within basically driving distance of that area, and notified them that if anyone comes into that treatment facility seeking medical treatment with wounds consistent that we were looking for, that we needed to be notified. Well, if we put that information out to the media, then obviously we're going to push that guy away from medical treatment.
Right.
And because he knows that we're looking for that, he knows that he's injured, or that we know that he's injured. So there's a time lapse before we can push that information out. Once that time did lapse, then we did go ahead and release the information that we felt like he was injured. Having said that, we didn't know what those injuries were. We knew that there was a violent struggle out there, and we didn't know if he was injured to his hands, to his arms, if he had head injuries. We knew that there was blood loss, but we didn't know for sure. So you're inclined to put out to the public that, we're looking for a person that matches this description, that may have these types of wounds. But what if we get that wrong? And we're working off percentages that we feel like that there's a good chance that that's the type of wounds that this person has. But it turns out that wasn't the case. And now there's a suspect that someone may think that, hey, we need to take a look at this guy. I think that, it's someone that you'd be interested in. But, he doesn't have cuts to his hands or his arms, or,
Right.
some of the things that we are kind of speculating about at that point because it's not confirmed. So we have to be very careful about unintentionally putting a red herring out there that now we have people not calling in and giving us information that we need because it doesn't fit certain things that we think it should fit. And, so that's always a concern. I can tell you that every day when we met with the investigators and our communications team, it was specifically with the intent of giving the public as much information as we could possibly give them without giving them something that was going to be detrimental to the case. In addition to identifying and arresting this subject, we also have to prosecute him successfully. And so even as we sit here today, there's a little bit of concern about at some point a jury's going to be seated. And we can't give a lot of information that might be considered inflammatory because we don't want to prejudice that jury. We don't want to give a defense the opportunity to claim that we've prejudiced that jury. So I can tell you that there was a lot of discussion about having a press conference immediately and addressing the media. But one of the things that's a pet peeve of mine is for someone to call a press conference to only stand there and say, I don't know, or I won't say. Mm-hmm. That's extremely frustrating. And so we didn't want to do that. So we put out as much information as we could, as quickly as we could, but all the while it had to be calculated on, is this going to hinder the investigation? Is this going to help us? And a lot of the information that we put out did result in tips and things like that we were able to work off of that helped tremendously. And to another question that you asked as far as like the tip lines and things like that, honestly, we were overwhelmed with people that are very well-intentioned, that are calling and they're trying to give information that they think we need to know. And until you triage that information and you realize that it's either beneficial or it's not, there's some that you can, kind of write off pretty quick, and there's some that you can't. But if you receive 500 plus tips, that's 500, different directions now we're sending our investigators. So it's a very lengthy process, which you can quickly get outside of your bandwidth on your capability. In this particular case, we had no reason to believe on the front end that there was any connection between our victim and our suspects. But we didn't know that. And it's something that you have to, look into and close that loophole. So you immediately start doing almost a background of your victims and trying to find if there's any type of adversarial relationships that they have. In this situation, our victims were from California. They had moved to Montana, then to South Dakota, then most recently to Arkansas. And so there was a huge geographical area that we had to cover to talk to neighbors, talk to work associates, talk to family members, anything and everything that you could think of, trying to establish if there was some type of relationship that we need to look at, if there was a possible, motive behind this. And, everything that every lead that you're having to either close a loophole on or follow up on, it's spreading those resources out pretty quick. So we did rely on other state, city, and federal agencies to assist with that. We have federal partners that were able to assist us with some technology that that proved to be very, very beneficial. So it was absolutely a coordinated effort. One thing that we're blessed in Arkansas, as Captain Tosh knows, unfortunately this is not always the case, but just tell it like it is, law enforcement tends to be very territorial sometimes, and they're very hesitant to reach out for help. And in Arkansas, we are so blessed that we don't deal with that. I got calls immediately from sheriffs, police chiefs, special agents in charge of FBI, HSI, you name it. You know, whatever the federal acronym is, they were calling saying, what do you need? How can we help you? And so it's nice to not only know that they're there if we reach out to them, but they were reaching out to us. Okay. And it was the same with all of our local partners there, even the partners in California and those other states that I mentioned. So it quickly can overwhelm resources, so you have to rely on those relationships. And we're very blessed in Arkansas that we've got a really good relationship with our local and federal partners, and it made all the difference in this case, and it's the reason that an arrest was made as fast as it was.